them troupe for more than 3 years now. I enjoy telling stories about mythology and folklore and tales of wit and cunning, and today is no different. I hope you enjoy the stories I'm about to tell you.
Hi, I'm Aria, and today I will be telling an Akbar and Birbal story entitled Birbal's Khichdi. One winter day, Akbar and his courtiers were taking a walk by the town, and towards late afternoon, they took a chance to rest and wash their feet in a nearby lake. And as Akbar took off his shoes and stepped his feet in the cold water, he shivered and exclaimed to the crowd, "Anyone who can stand a full night in this water up to their neck will earn 5,000 gold coins from me." And the courtiers and all the crowd were shocked, for they thought this task near impossible. But one old man came up to the emperor and said, "Your Majesty, I will try the task. The money will help feed my family." "Well, of course," said Akbar happily, and he posted 2 guards with the old man to make sure he spent the entire night in the lake. And so Akbar and his courtiers went back up to the palace for the night. The next morning, the palace guards came back with the old man, and Akbar addressed them. "Guards, did the old man spend the entire night in this lake?" "Yes, your Majesty, the whole night he spent in the lake." And Akbar was quite satisfied with this answer, so he called to get the money for the old man, when a jealous courtier interrupted him. "Your Majesty, I say this old man does not deserve the money. He did not complete his task in good faith." He looked at the old man. "Old man, what were you doing all night as you were completing this?" The old man thought about it. "Well, I suppose I was looking at the palace lights. They were a few miles away, but I could imagine their warmth, and it helped me get through the night." "Aha!" said the courtier. "You see, your Majesty, this man did not complete the challenge in good faith. He was staring at the palace lights and thereby taking their warmth, and he could not deserve this hefty reward." Well, Akbar thought about this, and to all the courtiers, and especially Birbal's surprise, he did not disagree with his courtier. Instead, he nodded and had the money taken away and the old man sent back to his home. Well, Birbal was very disappointed about this, and he vowed that the old man would get his due reward. But he didn't want to oppose the emperor in front of everyone, so he waited till the day's affairs were over, and then went up to him and said, "Your Highness, I would like to invite you and the other courtiers to dinner at my house next week." And Akbar was a bit stunned by this strange request, but Birbal was his friend, so he didn't say anything, and he left the matter where it was, and waited for a week to go by, which it did rather quickly, and eventually it was time for dinner at Birbal's house. Akbar and the other courtiers arrived on time in the afternoon, and they got seated at the dining table, and Birbal came in as they were seated and said, "Apologies, your Majesty, but the dinner is not ready yet." And Akbar and his courtiers were fine with this. And so they waited. As Birbal went away, they waited minutes, half an hour, an hour, and they started to wonder what was taking him so long. But Birbal came back and said, "1,000 apologies, your Majesty. The dinner is taking much longer than usual. Please wait a little longer." And he went back outside. Well, the courtiers waited again and again. Birbal came in one more time, apologizing again and saying that the khichdi that he was making was taking much longer than usual, and if they would just be patient, it would be out in a moment. If you didn't know, khichdi is a traditional Indian dish served with rice and meat, and usually cooked over a fire. So the courtiers and Akbar assumed it was just taking a bit longer than usual, but as the sun started to dip below the horizon, they started to wonder when their dinner would be served, for it had reached almost 5 hours now, and they were getting very hungry. Eventually, Akbar decided to go outside and see for himself. And what he found angered and astonished him, for Birbal was standing over the fire with a pot, but the khichdi was not there. Instead, the khichdi was in a pot in a tree, almost 10 feet above the fire. "Birbal," the emperor explained, How could you expect to cook the Khichdi? It is more than 10 feet in the air. The fire's all the way down here. Your Majesty, I apologize, but I believe it can. You see, if an old man can stare at palace lights a few miles away and take their warmth in, well, why can't a pot of Khichdi cook in a fire merely a few feet away? And at this, Akbar had to admit he was wrong that day, and that Birbal was right as usual. The next day, he went, called the old man back, and gave him his just reward. And him and the other courtiers once again could not argue that Birbal was the wisest of them all.
This story is called The Stolen Smell. There was once a baker who lived in a small town, but she was so talented in her craft that people would come from far and wide just to get a taste of her delicious confections. And the people, they loved her, but she sadly did not love them. In fact, the only thing that she loved was money, and she thought it to be the only way to achieve happiness in the world. But so she would sell her goods at exorbitant prices, even to the poor peasants who just wanted a taste of her delicious pastries. But the baker did not care. In fact, she was quite content with her life, and her ideals were never challenged. Not until one day. The baker, as usual, was setting out a plate of cinnamon rolls on her porch to cool, when she noticed that another one was out on their porch, one of her neighbors. A poor peasant woman who the baker thought couldn't possibly have enough money to sustain herself. She was eating cold soup and stale bread, but for some reason she did not seem unhappy. In fact, she was smiling and even sharing some of her food with her neighbors. This puzzled and enraged the baker woman, for how could she possibly be happy with so little in the world? And then it struck her. The cinnamon rolls were wafting over to the neighbor and all of her other neighbors, and she could even see the peasant woman smiling happily and taking a big inhalation of the air. Aha! That's how she's getting her happiness. The smell of these pastries is wafting over to her and making her food smell delicious, and she's sharing it with all her neighbors. Well, the baker woman could not stand for this, so she marched over to the peasant's house and pounded on her door. The peasant opened. Yes? No questions. I demand you pay this instant 20 gold coins. Hand it over. What are you talking about? You're the baker, right? I assure you I've stolen nothing from your shop. In fact, I don't even have enough money to buy anything there. Don't play games with me, okay? I know you've been stealing the smell of my pastries for who knows how long now. The smell of it wafts into your food, makes it delicious, right? And then you give it to all of your friends. No, I assure you, I haven't stolen anything from you. This is absurd. Well, if you're so intent on arguing about this, I'll take your case straight to court. And that's exactly what the baker did. In just a week's time, the baker, the peasants, and half the town were seated in the court, ready to see how this absurd case would play out. In fact, the town didn't even think there was a judge who would take on such a crazy case. But, to their surprise, there was one young man from a far-off land who was visiting, and he agreed to take on the case. On the appointed day, he came out dressed in a simple robe from his homeland, and he addressed both the women and heard their cases, and listened, and at the end, he addressed the peasant. Peasant woman, you say that you don't deny that you have been taking in the smell of this woman's pastries and enjoying that smell. Well, no, of course not, Your Honor, but that's not stealing. I did not ask for an explanation. Then he addressed the baker. And baker woman, you are an eyewitness. You do not deny that this woman has indeed been taking in the smell of your pastries and enjoying it. No, of course not, Your Honor, and I demand to be paid for it. That's all I asked. And the judge looked at both the women. Well, I've pondered this case, and I hereby decree that the peasant woman is guilty of all charges. The townsfolk gasped, but before anyone could protest, the judge went over to the peasant woman. Peasant woman, I expect you to go to your house this minute and retrieve all the gold coins you have, and I will pay the rest. And the poor peasant woman was forced to go all the way over to her house and retrieve what little money she had. And when the peasant woman came back with her 3 measly gold coins, the judge took them and then took 17 more out of his pocket, and soon he had 20 gold coins in his hand. He walked over to the baker, passing them from one hand to the other. Baker, Do you like the sound of these coins? Oh, yes, Your Honor. More than anything in the world, she said, her eyes gleaming. Well then, the judge passed them back and forth for a moment. Well then, I declare this case to be settled. And he addressed the court. You see, the baker was indeed robbed. She has had the smell of her pastry stolen from her by this woman. So I compensated her fairly with the sound of these gold coins. And with that, he went up to the peasant woman and gave her the 20 gold coins. And the baker at that point had to admit defeat. So she went back to her bakery, but her lesson was well learned. And that lesson, money is not the way to achieve happiness. No, happiness can only be achieved with kindness, compassion, and a little bit of wit. Thank you.